Hey everyone, it's Anime Reaper coming at you with another What If Naruto Found Out About Uzumaki Clan at a Young Age, Part 13. This fanfiction was written by Dreener. If you like this what if and want more like it, please like and subscribe to my channel and don't forget to check the description and leave a comment down below. Without further ado, let's get started. Chapter 26, A Symbol of Phoenix. Naruto. He slowly made his way towards his home, not that it really mattered. No one was waiting for him there, just an empty house full of loneliness. The first day was eventful. After the training, many girls had started looking at him with literal stars in their eyes. Looking at him like he was a good piece of meat or something. That annoyed Naruto since he knew that none of them was taking the academy seriously. Probably thinking that being a shinobi means you will be famous or that it is easy to be one. Naruto didn't like that kind of girl. He was only 8 years old, but he wanted a girl that if she was a kunoichi, was a strong one and took the job seriously. It had her dreams for the future and didn't let anyone control her, a girl that had ambitious for the future. Funny and maybe a bit hot-headed. Naruto shook his head and noticed the gaze of many villagers around. He wondered how long it would take for them to try and attack him again. Naruto still remembered that night well, and he would never let them harm him again. During the academy, he had talked with Ino, who looked happy to see him again, but Naruto could see and literally feel her need to look behind. Naruto had glanced and noticed that she wanted to see the emo Uchiha sitting alone at his desk that was ignoring every living being around him. Naruto saw the emo and decided to see if he wanted to be a friend with him. After the hour was done, some students walked outside. The girls mostly depended on whether the cool Sasuke was staying or leaving the class. Naruto ignored them and stood in front of his desk. The Uchiha noticed the redhead and turned his eyes at him. "Do you want to come to sit with us?" Naruto suggested and pointed at where Shikamaru and Koji were sitting. Sasuke grunted and gave him a glare that Naruto had just brushed off. "I don't need to spend time with you losers," he replied with a cocky tone. Shikamaru and Koji didn't care about his words since they knew that Sasuke didn't care for anyone. They told the same to Naruto when he suggested asking the emo if he wanted to sit with them. Suddenly the air around Sasuke felt cold like ice, even he felt a shiver through his whole body. Every fiber of his being was telling him that he had fucked it up. Naruto slammed his hand on the desk that broke the desk like it was made of nothing but paper. "Listen to me, you emo. I don't care what you say to me, but next time you talk like that, I will make sure that you know what it means to know pain," Naruto said with a promise. His voice was cold as winter, his whole body leaking ki enough to freeze Sasuke where he stood. Everyone was silent around the class. Kiba felt a cold sweat on his forehead. Shino's bugs could feel the massive amount of chakra in Naruto, but what frightened them was the demonic chakra. The fangirls of Sasuke wanted to yell at Naruto and protect their precious Sasuke-kun, but all the words had died on their throats. Ino, on the other hand, looked impressed by his amount of strength. Naruto turned around and walked back to his desk as if nothing had happened. Naruto didn't feel sorry for saying that to the emo. If there was one thing he hated, it was the cocky bastards like him who see everyone else beneath him. After that, Naruto got to know Shino, who actually talked smartly, and Hinata. She looked decent enough and didn't look like a fangirl, but she turned as red as his hair when he tried to talk to her. After that, Naruto walked back to his desk and spoke with Shikamaru and Koji. Naruto wondered when Togeji would return. He hoped soon. But at the same time, he wanted to surprise him. Naruto was working on a seal he hoped to impress him but would take a few months to complete it. As he kept walking, he could feel the Umbu staying close, but one of them had a chakra that he recognized. He stooped, walked, and turned his head up and looked at the Umbu at the top of the building. "I know you're there," he shouted, making a few citizens around confused. An Umbu with a dog mask suddenly appeared in front of him. Naruto recognized his white hair, and who could forget the mask under his Umbu mask. Kakashi removed his Umbu mask and greeted his student when Naruto pointed the finger at him, smiling. "You're the old man," he shouted excitedly. Kakashi lowered his head in despair. Clouds formed on top of him and started raining only at him, while his Umbu friend was busy lying on the floor and laughing her ass off. "Old man Kakashi, can't wait to tell the others," she yelled, still laughing. Kakashi only lowered his head even more. Naruto looked at him, not sure what to do. While Kakashi was murmuring something about a guy named Guy. Naruto wasn't sure what he meant but decided to cheer him up. I was only joking, Kakashi-sensei, it's good to see you again, Naruto quickly said. Kakashi slowly stood, and I smiled at him. Just joking around, Naruto, he replied, smiling and turning to look at Naruto more closely. He had to admit that Naruto had grown quite a bit, and he couldn't help but notice the sword behind his back. That confused him slightly since he was sure that he didn't have the blade at the academy. I see you have grown up, Naruto, it's good to see my student again, he said with another eye smile. Naruto smiled back but noticed the orange book on his porch. He was sure that it was Jiraiya-sensei's book from the color alone. Naruto remembered the first book that he gave him. It had a fantastic story, and apparently, his father had loved his first book, and he wondered what this one had a story like that. Kakashi-sensei, can I borrow your book? Naruto asked innocently and pointed at his book. At that moment, Kakashi felt like he would burn in hell. He could feel the ki of his Umbu friend, and she despised his books and had tried many times to slice them with her katana. He put a hand behind his head and took a step back. Ha! Ha 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 ho! Why do you want it? Kakashi asked, sweating, and his whole body was sweating. He hoped that Naruto was just curious. Jiraiya-sensei writes that book, I have seen him write it but never read it. Can I borrow it since the shops won't sell it to me, he said, smiling innocently at him. Kakashi felt all his blood leave his whole body, and his entire face turned pale like snow. But fortunately, his friend landed beside him and smiled at Naruto. That book is not for you, Naruto-kun, how about you go to Ushura Ramen, she suggested with a soft tone. Naruto turned his attention to her and noticed her katana. He wondered how good was she since she was an Umbu but decided not to bother her since probably she had already her hands full with her job as an Umbu. He nodded his head and decided to leave. Alright, I hope to meet Kakashi-sensei and Umbu-sama again, he said and bowed his head respectfully and soon left by jumping from roof to roof. Seeing him leave, Kakashi let out a sigh of relief. But then he turned his head slowly at his friend. If you even dare to think to hurt his innocence, I will burn all your books in front of you, she promised with a tone that sent shivers of fear in his body. He quickly raised his hands, trying to defend himself. There's no need. He's still too young for them, he replied and talked a few steps back. And decided to immediately leave and go after Naruto to see if anyone would bother him. Sarutobi. Paperwork after paperwork after paperwork after another pile of paperwork. He was getting tired of this evil spawn. He just wanted to have some time to read his favorite book and relax. Was that too much to ask? Apparently, it was when he saw the door opening and inside walked his former teammates. Homura, Koharu, and Danzo. He stopped his war with paperwork and prepared for his upcoming war. He thought that maybe that the actual shinobi war was easier than dealing with paperwork and his teammates. Why weren't we informed that the Jinhiriki has returned? Danzo asked, looking down at the old Hokage. Sarutobi sighed and stood up. His form showed power despite his age. Danzo noticed it and took a step back, and so did Homura and Koharu. Mostly to avoid this exact same conversation, but yes, Naruto has returned and has joined the academy, he replied, grabbing his pipe from the desk and smoking. Danzo narrowed his eyes, and Homura took a step forward. We have called for a meeting tomorrow morning, the council needs to know, she informed him and turned to leave. Sarutobi felt another headache coming. Oh no, we all know there's no reason to call for a meeting, he replied, hoping that Naruto being here would stay hidden for a while longer. Danzo smirked. Too late, Sarutobi, the village needs to know, he stated, and they left the office, leaving him alone with his headache. Tomorrow. The council had gathered early in the morning, it was 9 a.m., and everyone had arrived except the Hokage. The clan heads were there despite seeing this meeting as pointless. The civil part of the council discussed with each other since not all of them knew what was happening. The door suddenly opened to reveal Sarutobi walking inside, his face dead serious and showing authority. Everyone stood up until he sat in his chair, followed by everyone else. The Hokage was about to start this time-wasting meeting when a civil decided to speak up. What is that I heard that the demon has returned? I thought we killed the demon, he shouted, demanding answers when he felt everything became cold. Sarutobi had enough of this. Civil Ogura, do you need to be reminded that I'm the Hokage here, not you, he spoke with a tone that frightened everyone in the council. Even Danzo felt a shiver on his body. The civil sat down and kept quiet. Hiruzen turned to look at his teammates. "Why did you call this meeting for?" he demanded. The others were focused since they wanted to know why this meeting was called so early. Danzo cleared his throat, grabbing everyone's attention. "This council is gathered to announce that Uzumaki Naruto has returned to the village and has joined the academy," he said out loud for everyone to hear. Shikaku smiled hearing this. Of course, Shikamaru had told him yesterday after arriving from the academy that Naruto-kun had returned. He wondered how training for 4 years with Jiraiya-sama had shaped the boy. Inoichi was happy to hear that since Ino had informed him last night about his return. Even Choza was delighted for it despite not being sure at the beginning that it would be safe to have kids around him. Hayashi Hayaga kept an emotionless face but was slightly happy to hear about the son of Minato. Saminyuzuka smirked from ear to ear. She always hated the civil council for celebrating the death of a kid. It didn't take long, and the civil council was in an uproar, and one of them stood up with his hands slammed in the table. "I thought we killed that demon." Everyone saw his head rolling in the ground like a rock. The blood flew everywhere, and everyone in the civil council was shocked, and Sarutobi released his ki at maximum. That made all of them see visions of the same death. Even the clan heads were having a hard time to breath. Sarutobi stopped his ki, and silence took over the room. It felt like no one was there. The cloak could be heard ticking, even the bugs around Shibuya Barame's face were making sound enough to be heard around the room. After a few minutes without anyone talking, Sarutobi took a deep breath in his pipe. "Before you have any thoughts, Jiraiya himself had warned me not to hurt Naruto," Sarutobi warned and looked around the council to see if anyone wanted to speak again. "This meeting has ended," he announced, and stood up and left the room. Danzo clenched his teeth and hands and looked at Sarutobi as he was leaving. "You think you won this round, Sarutobi, but even the demon brat can't do anything against my weapons. Once he's mine, I will have everything left by the 4th Hokage, and the Kyuubi will be mine," he thought and left the council ready to talk with his loyal weapons. Ushura. She had been training in her kenjutsu for hours now. She moved her sword like she was dancing in water, her long red hair flying with the wind, shining from the light of the sun high in the sky. She grabbed her sword tightly before swinging at the tree in front of her. The swing was strong enough to slice 5 trees, she saw them falling in the ground. Their leaves fell all around her. She took a deep breath and looked at her work. Her kenjutsu had advanced since Naruto had left, but she had slacked off a little in her fuinjutsu. She was still in level V, but Asha wasn't in any hurry. Right now, she wanted to perfect her kenjutsu and her elemental manipulation. She had left a clone to train in elemental manipulation. Since she had only 2 and had high water affinity, she first had started to work in water manipulation. She needed less time than Naruto, who had 4 of them, or few, who had 3. Thinking about the redhead, she felt sad. Just the thought of him saddened her. "He's my family," she thought with a smile on her face. The same was for Few. Asha couldn't wait to meet him again and wondered how would he look like when he grew up, she thought, her fingers playing with her hair. With a slight blush on her face, she closed her eyes and put the sword back to its scabbard. Her mind went to the Phoenix contract. Naruto had told her about it, and she wondered if she could find it anywhere. But one thing she remembered from Jiraiya-sama. He had told them the story of how he had ended up with the Toad contract. Apparently, he had tried to do the summoning jutsu without having a contract, but instead, he ended up in Mount Mayaboku. She put the finger on her chin and decided that it was worth a try. She quickly used her small kunai to cut her index finger, made all the necessary hand signs, and slammed her hand on the ground, but nothing happened. She raised her eyebrow and waited a few minutes, but nothing happened. She shrugged her shoulders and decided to go with her day. The day slowly ended. Ushura was lying in her bed, in Fu's house. Her friend slept in another bed next to hers. Fu had spent the whole day training her wind manipulation. Ushura slowly closed her eyes to sleep. She opened her eyes to see herself falling, her body spread and falling in the ground below. She was higher than she had ever been before. It seemed as though she had been falling for years. "Fly," a voice whispered in the darkness, but Ushura did not know how to fly, so all she could do was fall. The ground was so far below her she could barely make it out through the gray mists that whirled around her, but she could feel how fast she was falling, and she knew what was waiting for her down there. Even in dreams, you could not fall forever. She would wake up in the instant before she hit the ground, she knew. You always woke up in the instant before you hit the ground. And if you don't? The voice asked. The ground was closer now, still far, far away, 1,000 miles away, but closer than it had been. It was cold here in the darkness. There was no sun, no stars, only the ground below coming up to smash her, and the gray mists, and the whispering voice. She wanted to cry. Not cry. Fly. I can't fly, Ushura said. I can't. I can't. How do you know? Have you ever tried? The voice was high and thin. Asha looked around to see where it was coming from. A red bird was spiraling down with her, just out of reach, following her as she fell. She had a long red tail behind her, and her wings looked to be made of red flames. Help me, she said. I'm trying, the bird replied. Are you really a bird? Ushura asked. Are you really falling? The bird asked back. It's just a dream, Ushura said. Is it? Asked the bird. I'll wake up when I hit the ground, Ushura told the bird. You'll die when you hit the ground, the bird said. It went back to looking at the ground below. Ushura looked down. She could see mountains now, their peaks white with snow, and the silver thread of rivers in dark woods. She closed her eyes and began to cry. That won't do any good, the bird said. I told you, the answer is flying, not crying. How hard can it be? I'm doing it. The bird took to the air and flapped around Ushura's hand. You have wings, Asha pointed out. Maybe you do too. Asha felt along her shoulders, groping for feathers. There are different kinds of wings, the bird said. Ushura was staring at her arms, her legs. She was so skinny, just skin stretched taut over bones. Had she always been so thin? She tried to remember. A face swam up at her out of the gray mist, shining with light and darkness. You said you wouldn't let any of your friends die. Look around you, it said. Ushura screamed. The bird took to the air, cawing. Not that, it shrieked at her. Forget that, you do not need it now, put it aside, put it away. It landed on Ushura's shoulder and pecked at her, and the shining dark face was gone. Ushura was falling faster than ever. The gray mists howled around her as she plunged toward the earth below. What are you doing to me? She asked the bird, tearful. I am teaching you how to fly. I can't fly. You're flying right now. I'm falling. Every flight begins with a fall, the bird said. Look down. I'm afraid. Look down. Asha looked down and felt her insides turn to water. The ground was rushing up at her now. The whole world was spread out below her, a tapestry of white and brown and green. She could see everything so clearly that for a moment, she forgot to be afraid. She could see the whole world and everyone in it. She saw the hidden leaf as the eagles see it, the tall towers looking squat and stubby from above, the walls just lines in the dirt. The faces of the old Hokage are carved in the mountain. She saw Naruto in an empty field alone, surrounded by hatred and despair. She wanted to cry when she saw her friend alone. She saw a giant shadow slowly rising behind Naruto. The shadow had strange purple eyes with dark rings. The shadow gradually thinned, the strange purple eyes smashed together and became one single eye, but instead, there were 3 tomos in each circle. The shadow looked different, and 10 tails slowly spread behind him. Asha saw Naruto slowly turning to look at her, but one eye was blue, but the white part of the eye had changed to dark like a void, and the other eye still looked normal. His face was half dead and half alive. His kind eye was crying tears of happiness, the other crying frozen tears of despair. It felt Ushura watching, it lifted its eyes from the still waters and stared back at her knowingly. She looked east and saw mountains kissing the sky, reaching beyond anyone had ever reached before. At the top of the highest mountain, a girl crying tears of lies and love. She looked at the village hidden in the mist, a boy sitting alone in the room, his eyes crying the pain inside his heart. But his shadow was that of a man with a shurinan, a smile on the shadow man's face. She looked around and saw a boy holding in his shoulders the pain of loss of loved ones, the hatred of a lie, and the love of a girl that loved him until the end. His shurinan shone like fire in the darkness. She lifted her eyes and saw clear, a magnificent village now in ruins, once was what known for peace and understanding, now left in nothing but ash and death. Now you know, the bird whispered as it sat on her shoulder. Now you know why you must live. Why? Ushura said, not understanding, falling. Asha looked at the bird on her shoulder, and the bird looked back. It had 2 eyes, one red full of blood and the other dark full of darkness. Asha looked down. There was nothing below her now but snow and cold and death. Now, Ushura, the crow urged. Choose. Fly or die. Death reached for her, screaming. Ushura spread his arms and flew. Wings unseen drank the wind and filled and pulled her upward. The terrible needles of ice receded below her. The sky opened up above. Asha soared. It was better than training. It was better than anything. The world grew small beneath her. I'm flying. She cried out in delight. The bird landed on her shoulder, and his eyes looked at her before poking her forehead. She felt pain and fire in her forehead. Fly, fly like fire, raise from the ashes. The bird whispered. Find me, find us in the place where the sun never shines. Where the forgotten rest. The bird said before his whole body engulfed in red flames. His wings, his legs, his chest, his head, and his eyes. Everything became fire before taking the sky and went to her forehead like a burning arrow. Ushura screamed in pain, the burning feeling spread all over her body, her forehead felt like it would split. Her body became fire, red lines spreading all over her body. Her legs, her arms, her chest, and her head. The flames slowly disappeared, and the lines slowly retreated back. The fire in her forehead died down, and left was an empty red circle with a slighter darker circle inside. Ushura felt her body go limp, her eyes closing on her own. That night Ushura kept sleeping, but her forehead slowly started shining in the darkness of the night. A small red circle slowly appeared on her forehead, and a smaller, darker one inside the first circle. The light died down, but the rings stood there. Chapter 27, Memories. Jiraiya. The silence of the forest around was relaxing, but Jiraiya of the Sun-In had to meet someone. He dropped his pen and stood up on his feet. His face, usually funny and joking, now was serious and made him look like a real shinobi. He closed his eyes for a second before opening them again. In front of him now stood a man wearing black cloak with red clouds. His hair had grown a bit, but his Sharingan could clearly be seen. His face looked emotionless to anyone, but Jiraiya could see right through his mask. Sometimes he still wondered how he could even stay sane after what he was forced to do. When Sarutobi-sensei had informed him of the real reason why the Uchiha clan was massacred, Jiraiya didn't believe it. They would be so foolish. Even if somehow, by some miracle, they would take over the village, both sides would take heavy losses, and that point would be like inviting Kumo or Iwa to conquer the Hidden Leaf village. Jiraiya clenched his fist and had a fighting position if something happened out of the ordinary. Jiraiya-sama, is good to meet you again, but I don't have time to stay, Itaka said respectfully before throwing a scroll at Jiraiya. He grabbed it and quickly sealed it away. Something else? Jiraiya asked with a serious tone, his tone firm. The leader has the Rinnegan, Itaki informed him, and Jiraiya took a step back. His eyes widened, his face filled with different thoughts, and he didn't know what to think. His location? Jiraiya asked quickly, wondering where this leader stayed. If Itaka knew, perhaps Jiraiya could pay him a little visit and see for himself if this one was his old student or someone who had stolen his eyes. Itaka shook his head in denial, much to Jiraiya's disappointment. But he quickly got over it and told him to leave before they understood that he had left. Itaka quickly turned into crows and flew away. Jiraiya just stood there, not knowing what to think of all this. Nagato, is that really you? But why? He had many questions and no answers to any of them. He had always regretted not taking his students with him to the Hidden Leaf village, they would be safer there. Jiraiya knew Nagato's Rinnegan would be hard to hide, especially from people like Danzo or Orochimaru, who would kill to have it. But still, perhaps they would be safer there than in Rain Village. Jiraiya thought perhaps his students were still in Hidden Rain Village, but that possibly was slim. The Hidden Rain Village was still under Hanzo the Salamander, and he was an excellent shinobi that managed to wipe the floor with all three Sun-In when they were at their peak. He knew he could walk in and possibly search if they were there, but if he weren't there, he would waste his time and possibly risk his life. Jiraiya knew he didn't have time to search around for him, and he still needed to keep an eye on Orochimaru and the villages around Hidden Leaf. Iwa hated the village with a burning passion right now, but they still were recovering from their huge losses against Minato. Jiraiya had received letters saying that apparently the older man Onoki didn't really crave for vengeance, or maybe he had gotten soft. When it came to Kumo, their attempt to kidnap Hinata Hyuga had spread around, and that put them in a wrong spot. Many lands that usually hired Kumo shinobis had either started hiring shinobi or different villages or not hiring at all. Not every land liked to hire shinobi from a village that would go so low that they would try to do something like that. Acts like that were looked at as horrific, and many people didn't want to have any connection with that kind of shinobis. The lands around Kumo, of course, would continue hiring them, but the lands outside the lighting land were having second guesses. Then his mind went to Kiri. The village was in a civil war. The kind and gentle Mizukage had suddenly ordered all the people with a bloodline to be executed with no exceptions. He wondered why the sudden change towards his people. Jiraiya didn't need to be a genius to conclude that he was under a genjutsu, but the thought that someone could control a Mizukage and not mention the said Mizukage was a jinhuriki. His mind then went to Nagato. He sighed in annoyance and a hint of sadness, and he didn't know which could be worse. Someone had stolen Nagato's Rinnegan for himself, or Nagato himself was the leader of the Akatsuki. Jiraiya wasn't sure which one was worse. Jiraiya looked down at the scroll Ataka gave him. He opened it and read the information provided to him. I don't know the identity of the leader. I have seen him only twice and only see him through a jutsu that made him look like a shadow. I can't tell how he looks except his Rinnegan. My partner is Kisame Hoshigaki. His strongest weapon is his sword, same Hada, that can absorb the chakra of the enemy. Kisame mentioned that he could absorb Baijiryo chakra too. I'm not sure about Sage chakra. Jiraiya put the finger on his chin. The sword looked quite helpful, but he doubted that he could absorb Sage chakra. It would take lots of training and time to use Sage chakra without turning to stone. Hell, Jiraiya himself couldn't use it without the help of Ma and Pa. I haven't seen anyone else from the organization except I know Orochimaru is in the Akatsuki. I can't send information for a long time. We will move to test Jinhuriki after 5 years and start capturing them after 8 years. Jiraiya finished the letter and set it on fire, and he wondered if Naruto would be strong enough to fight them when they came after him. He hoped that he would be. When it came to how strong he was, Jiraiya knew Naruto was strong. Hell, if he used one tail chakra cloak and without weights, he was sure that Naruto would be strong. Maybe medium Jonin level, but he doubted it. And Orochimaru in the Akatsuki. Jiraiya never thought his former teammate would ever accept to be part of a group, but he was sure he was there to try and steal the Rinnegan or possibly the Sharingan of Itachi. Jiraiya then thought about Tsunade. He got information that he was in the land of tea. He put his things back in his bag and returned to his journey to find Tsunade. 3 weeks later. The village in front of him wasn't a big one but was an excellent place to stay, and not that many bandits around. Land of Tea always hired shinobi of Hidden Leaf Village to protect them whenever they needed help. Jiraiya reached a tea restaurant and walked inside. He looked around and saw his friend and sat close to him, not giving him any eye contact. The man making the tea was an older man who looked kind. "What tea can I give you?" he asked kindly. Jiraiya glanced at his eyes and could tell this was a veteran probably. "I want a cup of leaf tea," Jiraiya ordered, and the old man nodded his head before walking away and started preparing the tea. The friend close to him passed him a blank letter before getting up and leaving the tea restaurant. He left a few coins to pay for his tea on the table. Jiraiya quickly sealed the letter on his seal under his sleeve. The older man returned and gave him the cup of tea. Jiraiya took a sip and couldn't help but notice that was probably the best tea he had ever tested. "Delicious tea, I'm sure you have a lot of work," Jiraiya praised him. The older man smiled and was a genuine smile. "Thank you, is not every day that I have a man like you come to my restaurant. A cup of tea is an extraordinary thing," the old man said kindly as he poured him another cup of tea. "I see you have struggled with yourself," he said, sitting on the other side of the table. Jiraiya raised his eyebrows and wondered how he knew. "Just ghosts of my past," Jiraiya replied, drinking tea again. "I know how it's like to be tormented by the past. My son died young, before his time. And me, I'm old and still standing. One thing I know about failures is that they're opportunities to start again but wiser," he said and walked away. Jiraiya thought about what he said and wondered if he was doing what was right. He wasn't there when Minato needed him most, but now Naruto. Jiraiya thought of him, he thought of his smile, his eyes determined, full of love and determination. Like a true Kage should be. "I'm going to rebuild my home. I'm going to build a village that no one would ever be harmed or looked down on. A village that anyone can call home." Jiraiya remembered Naruto's word. Closing his eyes, he remembered Minato. "You're my teacher, and I know no one better to be the godfather of my son." Jiraiya smiled and stood on his legs. He left twice the coins needed for payment and walked to the door. He soon left and decided to see his teammate. It had been a long time since he had last seen her. Later, he saw a casino close to him. He knew she must be there. he had already checked every restaurant that sells sake, but she wasn't in any of them. His hands went to his pocket and looked at the photo he had with Naruto. He smiled and took all his courage to walk inside. His eyes soon saw a blonde woman playing in a machine. Close to her stood a woman with dark hair who looked concerned and holding a pig in her hands. Jiraiya slowly reached her and decided to let her know of his presence. "You know, some things change, but some never change, Tsunade," he said with a slight smirk on his face. Tsunade stopped playing and turned her head to look at Jiraiya. The woman close to her, who Jiraiya knew was Shizuan, looked surprised and slightly nervous. "What are you doing here, Jiraiya? Can't you see I'm trying to win?" Tsunade shouted, annoyed but slightly happy to see her teammate, but he didn't need to know the last part. Jiraiya laughed at her response. "Oh please, the day you win is not a day I'm looking forward to," he replied, since he knew her luck in gambling was known everywhere. That's why some had called her the legendary sucker. "But I'm here to offer you a drink," he said, smiling. Tsunade raised her eyebrow but then just shrugged her shoulders and decided to follow him behind. A free sake was an opportunity she wouldn't let slip. Reaching a restaurant, they sat, and Tsunade immediately ordered sake. Shizuan just ordered a glass with water, and Jiraiya ordered the same. The orders arrived, and Tsunade drank a glass with one go, filled another one, and turned her head at Jiraiya. "So why are you here, Jiraiya? If you want me to return to the village, my answer is no," she said determinedly. Jiraiya sighed sadly, looking at the woman, how she was before. He shook his head and just decided to be blunt. "No, I'm here to ask why you aren't keeping your promise to Kushina," he said harshly, and gone was the humorous tone. The mention of Kushina's name made Tsunade break the glass, and her whole body filled with sadness and then with rage. She looked at her teammate with fury. Shizuan noticed her eyes and hoped she wouldn't do anything drastic. "What are you saying, Jiraiya? The child died just like every precious person in my life," she shouted, and trying to hold back the tears. Jiraiya didn't even flinch from her tone and just took his photo with Naruto and reached it out for her to grab. Tsunade noticed the photo and quickly grabbed it to see Jiraiya with a kid. She closed her eyes tightly before opening them again to look at the photo again. She noticed his red hair, exactly like Kushina's. She thought and looked at his eyes, his whiskers, his spiky hair like Minato's. His blue eyes are like an ocean, but most importantly, his smile. It was her smile. She felt her heart beating in her throat, her breath quickened, just like when she lost him. His blood in her hands. She shook her head and looked at the photo again, but she could see it as clear as day. Tears slowly started rolling down her cheek, her hands holding the picture tightly as life depended on it. She was biting her lower lip to the point of drawing blood. "I'm sorry, but he didn't survive, his chakra was abnormal. I'm sorry, Tsunade-sama." Tsunade remembered the cursed words very well. She looked at the photo again. His red hair and blue eyes. Naruto-kun. Chapter 28, Godmother. Naruto. Explosion, another failed seal. Naruto couldn't understand what he was doing wrong. He was trying to create a new seal and wondered what Togeji would think about it, but the seal kept exploding in his face, almost like it was mocking him. He sighed and started drawing again and trying to understand what he was doing wrong. He kept drawing slowly and carefully, almost afraid that it would break. Today was Sunday and a free day from academy. Naruto had created many clones to start practicing his new fire jutsu. Another 100 clones practice wood style, but Naruto always made sure to put a barrier seal and chakra detection seal around to ensure no one could see what he was doing. Second, the seal prevented his chakra from being detected by anyone outside the seal. Naruto knew he could get a clone to try and make the new seal, but he wanted to do it himself, despite the seal exploding in his face over and over again. It had been 3 weeks since he arrived in the Hidden Leaf Village. The news of his arrival had spread like wildfire, but surprisingly no one tried to attack him, but Naruto could feel their negative emotions from a mile away. Naruto just ignored them and kept on with his training. During the 3 weeks, he mostly spent his time with Shikamaru and Koji. He had a few talks with Shino, who sounded smart. Kiba had avoided him at all cost. Hinata, on the other hand, blushed every time he was close. Ino had a few talks with him and even went with him and Shikamaru and Koji to eat in a restaurant. Sasuke had kept quiet since he destroyed his desk, but one thing Naruto understood was that he spent all the time training. He understood that Imo had lost his family, but it wouldn't be bad to try and have some friends and not shut yourself from the rest of the world. Naruto escaped his thoughts when he finished the first step of the seal. He applied chakra to it and exploded on his face again. Naruto was thrown across the room and hit the wall. He sighed sadly and slowly stood up on his legs. Maybe you should wait until the toad comes back, after all, he's a master in Fuinjutsu, Kurama suddenly said, getting bored of healing Naruto's body over and over again. I know that, but I would want to surprise him and complete the seal on my own, Naruto replied in fixing his broken chair with wood style. There's no shame in needing help, only a fool thinks that he can do everything on his own, Kurama replied, crossing his legs and resting his head on his paws. Naruto thought about it and decided to try a few more times. If he couldn't complete the first step until tomorrow, he would wait until Togeji returned. He took a deep breath and decided to clear his head outside. Perhaps the sun and the songs of the forest would clear his mind. Walking outside, he soon reached the training yard. He stayed on his knees and started practicing his chakra control to a new level. His legs crossed above water, holding multiple leaves on his body and using one tail worth of chakra of Kurama. His clones made a seal so Kurama's chakra wouldn't be felt outside the seal and give the villagers extra reasons to be afraid and hate him. His whiskers grew, and his eyes turned red, his hair grew spikier, and a tail slowly grew behind his back. Kurama said that he needed this kind of chakra control exercise to make it easier when he tries 2 tails or more. You're doing well, Naruto, Kurama said, but then he noticed the trees growing all around Naruto, almost like protecting him. Naruto kept his focus on his exercise, and while he trained, someone was coming to the Hidden Leaf village. It was a typical and peaceful day in Konoha. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and there was a nice, calm, gentle breeze coming in from the west. At the main gate of this currently tranquil shinobi village were 2 Konoha Chunin who was happily relaxing in their assigned post. Taking advantage of the serenity surrounding them, they enjoyed it all by leaning back on the 2 rear legs of their chairs and resting their feet on the desk of the entrance booth. Ah, this is the life, isn't it, said one of the Chunin, enjoying the huge lack of traffic going in or out of their village. Yeah, nothing to do but relax, enjoy the sun, and let life pass you by slowly, said the other with a content sigh. The first guard barely opened his eyes from their closed position to stare at a passing cloud. True, but I would still give a lot for something interesting to happen, he pondered. You know the old saying, be careful about what you wish for because you just might. The second started but immediately stopped when he felt the ground shake beneath him and nearly fell from his chair. When he regained his bearings and opened his eyes, he saw something that made him pale and freeze with fear. Senju Tsunade was back in Konoha after so long, and she was stomping towards them like some wrathful giant. For every step she took, the ground would crack in small spiderweb-like patterns, leaving a vengeful trail behind her. As she headed towards them, they could practically see a black aura emanate around her that spoke of slow, agonizing pain and death. But the thing that freaked the 2 Chunin out the most was the disturbing red fire in her eyes that would have sent even the bravest and mightiest cage-level shinobi running for the hills. Scurrying behind Tsunade was a young teenage girl with short black hair carrying a small piglet in her arms. She seemed to be trying and failing to calm down her vengeful master with her unheard and frantic words, but they looked to be for naught. And behind her was the long white hair of Jiraiya of the Sunin, who had a big smirk on his face and didn't look to mind Tsunade's current mood, maybe for the first time in his life. As she, Jiraiya, and Tsunade passed by the Chunin, they saw that they stayed on the main path heading towards the Hokage Tower. They also could have sworn they heard Tsunade saying something about killing some poor old bastard along with all the different ways she was going to do it. As her form disappeared and joined the general populace in the distance, the 2 trained soldiers of Konoha quickly broke out of their stupors. The second Chunin paused before saying, "Didn't I tell you to be careful what you wish for?" The first just nodded dumbly and said, "Who do you think pissed her off that much to come back here?" "I don't know, but may Kami have mercy on his soul for Tsunade-sama will not." Both men shivered at the thought of what the famed Senjoku no Ichi would do to her unfortunate target and began to silently pray for the man who was about to painfully enter the next life at the hands of a vengeful slug princess. They could only imagine what would have also happened if they had asked her to sign in the logbook. Hokage Tower. Sarutobi finally finished his last paperwork for today. He took a deep breath and sighed in relief. It had been 3 weeks and no incidents about Naruto, and most importantly, he could finally continue his favorite book. What could go wrong now? He was about to open his secret drawer, but then he heard a loud noise coming from the corridor and a massive key that could almost rival that of Sarutobi. His eyes widened at the familiar key, and the screams started just as he had predicted. The umbus around his office were getting nervous. Before Hiruzen could actually try and do something, he heard a loud scream. "I don't care if he's busy, he will have plenty of time to rest once I'm done with him." The scream was heard from a very familiar person that Hiruzen didn't expect to hear anytime soon and, from what he was hearing, probably would be better not to hear anytime soon. The door burst open, and an umbu flew and hit his body against the wall. Sarutobi glanced at the unconscious umbu and wondered if it would be better to just lose consciousness like him and just pretend all this is a bad dream, a terrible dream. He turned to the exact source of the screams, and in front of him stood Tsunade, who looked to have a dark aura. Sarutobi now understood why not that many people liked the job of the cage. For a moment, he thought she was using Amaterasu somehow for the dark aura around her that looked like dark flames. His brave umbu suddenly stood in between her and him, their weapons ready, but two of his umbu were already having second guesses of what exactly were they trying to do. "Tsunade-sama, please calm down, we can discuss." He was interrupted whatever he was trying to say when Tsunade cracked her knuckles. Hiruzen felt cold sweat on his face when he noticed Jiraiya behind Tsunade, but he looked calm, almost like he was enjoying what was happening. Maybe for the first time in his life, Tsunade's anger wasn't directed at him. Tsunade looked at the mini shinobis in front of her before her strength cracked the floor. The umbu took a step back. "I give you one chance, leave now," Tsunade yelled and pointed the finger at the nearest window of the office. The umbu exchanged looks between each other before leaving through the window. "Cowards," Hiruzen murmured under his breath, but at the same time wanted to jump from the window like that. He raised his hands, trying to ease the tension, sweat rolling down his face like a waterfall. "Tsunade is goo." He was interrupted when Tsunade grabbed him by his collar and brought his face closer to hers. Her eyes were like fire, almost burning Hiruzen. The old Hokage was sure that if looks could kill, he would be ash right now. "Cut the crap, Hiruzen, tell me, why did you lie to me about Naruto-kun?" She screamed and slammed him in his Hokage chair, almost breaking the chair along with him. Hiruzen tried to catch his breath, but he had a confused look on his face. He turned to look at Tsunade again. "I don't know what you're talking about, Tsunade, but I never told you or sent any letters saying that Naruto had died," Hiruzen stated with a more serious tone and slightly higher tone. Tsunade took a step back, not understanding. The umbu had stated that Naruto-kun was born with abnormal chakra because of Kyuubi. They even showed her the body of Naruto. She clenched her fist so hard that blood started slowly falling on the floor. Everyone in the office noticed the drops of blood. "What do you mean? An umbu of yours showed me Naruto-kun?" Tsunade asked, not understanding what was happening, but she swore she would get at the bottom of this. This time Hiruzen got even more confused, while Jiraiya already knew what Tsunade was talking about since she had explained to him what had happened after the Kyuubi attack. "I didn't send you any umbu, Tsunade. When I wanted to inform you that Naruto-kun was alright, you had already left the village, and couldn't find you anywhere." Sarutobi started thinking of who could have possibly lied to Tsunade until he remembered his old teammate. He sighed and decided to deal with this a bit later, once everything was cleared here. Tsunade felt her anger rising. She knew her sensei would never lie for something like this. She still trusted him despite not being in Konoha for almost 9 years. But the question remained. Who could have fooled her? And why? Tsunade didn't know who, but already had a few thoughts of who could have done it. She thought about the 3 elders, and especially that rotten hawk Danzo. Taking a deep breath and trying to calm down, she looked at her sensei again, who looked deep in thoughts. "Where's Naruto?" she asked, demanding to know where he was. Sarutobi escaped his thoughts and turned his eyes at Tsunade again. "Today is Sunday, so he's probably in his house or the training yard," Sarutobi replied, unsure that Naruto would be in the training yard. Tsunade nodded her head before turning at Jiraiya, leaning against the wall, with his arms crossed. "Well, take me to him," she shouted at him. He nodded his head and left with her, this time through the door. Shizun quickly followed them behind, still keeping quiet about the whole thing. Sarutobi, on the other hand, was deep in thoughts. He needed to talk with the Danzo. He snapped his fingers, and an umbu showed up in front of him. The umbu was wearing a dark mask that looked like a ghost. Unlike the others, he had no eye holes in the mask to see. "Tell Danzo to come here," he ordered. The umbu spoke no words and left as soon as he appeared. "Jiraiya." He was leading Tsunade to the training yard. He thought that Naruto would be there. They checked. Well, they tried to check his house. Jiraiya put the hand on the handle just for it to electrocute him and throw him to the nearest wall. Tsunade had laughed at him. Jiraiya then had blocked the seal and opened the door just for it to put him in a genjutsu, and a jutsu activated that sent a fireball towards them. All three of them dodged quickly. Thankfully the fireball was a small one and had disappeared in the air without harming anyone. Jiraiya made a mental note to never go inside Naruto's house without an invite. After that, they had quietly and slowly walked inside, but Jiraiya could tell that the brat wasn't inside. After that, they left to look at the training yard. He could tell that Tsunade was impressed with Naruto's ability in Fuinjutsu, but Jiraiya wasn't sure how she would react to his wood style and that he held no love for the village. Jiraiya knew Naruto didn't hate the village, but he neither loved it, no, he loved his homeland, and Jiraiya knew he would one day leave to rebuild his destroyed home. Reaching the training yard, Jiraiya immediately noticed the barrier seal and the excellent camouflage, and he smiled, impressed by his Fuinjutsu. He pointed the finger at the barrier. With a hand sign the camouflage disappeared, showing the barrier, and inside was Naruto in chakra cloak one tail. Trees had grown all around him. Jiraiya couldn't detect chakra coming from the barrier, at least he knew Kyuubi's chakra would not be felt around the village. While Tsunade looked at her godson with her eyes widened, Jiraiya had informed her that Naruto knew about the Kyuubi, his parents, and that he apparently had a good friendship with the Kyuubi. She couldn't understand how he could have a friendship with the demon that killed his parents. But what caught her by surprise was the trees around Naruto, almost like they were protecting him. Before anyone could say anything, Naruto opened his eyes, and the chakra cloak slowly disappeared. His eyes, whiskers, and nails slowly turned normal. His red hair turned normal. He had noticed that his Togeji had arrived with two new people he hadn't felt before, but what caught his attention was that the chakra of one of them was slightly similar to his. He had asked for a long time his connection with the Senju clan, and perhaps his godmother had the answers. He stood on his legs and noticed the trees around him. The leaves around him had burned to ash since whenever he used Kurama's chakra, his fire affinity was more dominant than his other affinities. He slowly walked in front of who he knew was Tsunade-sama, his godmother. He didn't recognize the woman beside her. Naruto was about to open his mouth and greet her, but he was interrupted when she grabbed him and hugged him as life depended on it. Naruto's eyes widened, and he quickly hugged her back and heard her sobbing. "Naruto-kun, you're alive. You are here," she said, not believing her eyes. Naruto smiled and felt happiness in his entire body. After a minute of hugging, Tsunade slowly pushed back to look at him. "Let me look at you," she said with a soft tone and looking at his face from every angle. She couldn't help but notice Minato on his face. "You're so handsome, I'm sure every girl in the academy looks at you," she said, smiling. Naruto blushed in embarrassment and lowered his head. Tsunade laughed at his behavior. Naruto then turned to look at Togeji. "Togeji, is good to see you," Naruto greeted him. Jiraiya smiled but decided to mess with him. "Oh really? I saw how happy you are with the traps you had left on your doorstep. Who knows how many you left inside the house?" Jiraiya joking and rubbing his head behind his head. Naruto laughed. "If I knew you would come, I would have deactivated them," he replied. Tsunade laughed at the nickname. Naruto then turned to the third person. "My name is Naruto, miss. My name is Shizune, and this one here is our pig, Tun-Tun," Shizune said. "Naruto-kun, how about we go and eat something?" Tsunade suggested and made a mental note to ask Jiraiya later about the Mokuton ability of Naruto. The redhead nodded in agreement and decided to go to Ichiraku Ramen. They soon reached the Ichiraku Ramen. Walking inside, Naruto could feel the delicious smell around the air. He sat, and Tsunade decided to sit close to him. Ayame noticed Naruto first and immediately walked up to them. "Naruto-kun, is good to see you again," she said, smiling and hugging Naruto. She then noticed the blonde woman and Jiraiya-sama. She quickly bowed her head in respect. "Is it good to have you here, Jiraiya-sama and Tsunade-sama?" she said respectfully. "No need for that, 3 bowls with ramen and 1 big special ramen," Jiraiya ordered. Tsunade wondered who the big ramen was for but remembered Kushina, and she realized that Naruto loved ramen as much as his mother. "So Naruto-kun, tell me, how are you doing in the village? Have you made any friends?" she asked, knowing how Jinhurikis were usually treated. Naruto frowned slightly but quickly changed it to a smile, something that the Sunins noticed. "Is alright, Shikamaru, Ino, and Koji are good friends, and the academy is fun. I think, he replied, not wanting to mention that all the teachers except Irika straight up hated him. Something that the students in the class noticed. Tsunade wanted to ask more in detail, but if Naruto didn't want to talk about it, she decided not to pressure him. It's good to have friends, but who took care of you while you grew up? Tsunade asked curiously since she was sure that someone must have raised him. She knew Naruto was apparently living alone in an apartment. Naruto sighed. No one really, except for Hokage and Togeji. I pretty much grew up alone. In the orphanage, but that changed when I reached 4 years old. Togeji took me to train in Mount Myaboku for 3 years and 3 months and go around the world for 9 months, he replied smiling, and the ramen came. Tsunade bit her lower lip, not wanting to go to his old sensei and break his neck for letting Naruto grow up alone. She didn't need to know how the idiots around here treated him, their glares until they reached the ramen restaurant were enough to let her know that Naruto was hated just like how every Jinhiriki. The second thing she didn't know and found surprising was that Naruto had started training so young and so hard. Jiraiya mentioned to her about his super strength, and she wondered about it. So Naruto, Jiraiya told me you have powerful fists, she said, eating ramen but then noticed that Naruto had already eaten his big special ramen. Just like Kushina. She thought, smiling. Naruto ordered a second one before turning to his godmother. Yes, I found out when I was training in Mount Myaboku. I have grown more powerful, but problems with controlling them, he replied. Tsunade nodded in understanding since she had the same problems herself when she first started using her strength. Well, I can help you. Everybody knows me about my super strength, she suggested, and Naruto beamed. Thank you, Tsunade-san, he replied and returned to his ramen. Sarutobi. Taking a deep breath and smoking a bit from his pipe, he saw the door opening, and inside came his favorite teammate. You asked for me, Hokage-sama, Danzo said, trying to sound normal, but Hiruzen could clearly see right through his emotionless mask. Yes, Danzo Shimura, I need to ask you a few questions, and you should answer truthfully, he stated, leaking ki. Danzo narrowed his eyes slightly before sitting close to the desk of the Hokage. I got information that someone had apparently spread misinformation that Naruto had died in the Kyuubi attack. Any idea who could have done that? Sarutobi asked, leaking ki and looking straight in the eye. Danzo kept his gaze and did not flinch. I don't know who could have done that, he replied quietly. Sarutobi kept quiet, and silence took over the office. His fingers pinched the nose on his bridge and turned his cold eyes at Danzo again. You're free to go, he stated, and Danzo stood up and left without saying another word but still could feel the burning gaze of Sarutobi on his back. Leaving the office, he thought about a way to deal with the Kyuubi brat. I might need to visit the snake, he thought. Ushura. She was doing hand seals in front of the lake. She finished her last and shouted. Uzumaki style, water phoenix. The water in the lake suddenly changed and formed a phoenix in the air. The phoenix then flew and hit the wall and destroyed it into little pieces. Debris fell to the ground. Ushura smiled, happy that she could do the jutsu. She was about to look for Fu to let her know that she had completed her first A-rank jutsu when she heard the sound of a bird. She turned around to see a tree and in a branch was the red bird made of fire. This is not a dream. Ushura quickly said and walked closer. The bird kept quiet and flew away. Ushura followed him, he kept flying, and she kept chasing. Suddenly she saw the bird resting against the handle of a door. Asha slowly walked up to the handle and opened it to see a completely different place. The door shut violently behind her, and she saw the ruined houses. It felt like a war had just happened there. She saw the symbol of the Uzumaki clan in every house and building. She felt the cold to her bones, shivers running through her body like blades, piercing her flesh and skin. Look up, a voice said. Asha looked up to see something descending from the clouds. She couldn't see what but looked to be made of fire itself. Find us. That all for what if Naruto found out about Uzumaki clan at an early age. Part 13. If you like this story, please show your support by liking the video and subscribing to my channel, and also show your support to the author by hitting the link down in the description. Thanks for listening, and until next time.